David, this is the last of the rice. Tell me, where did the money go?
I bought shoes for the children again.
Our son has not eaten today, and you are buying shoes for strangers.
Somebody once bought shoes for me when nobody else would.
And who is going to buy food? For your own children, David.
The first pair of shoes David Okonkwo ever owned came from a stranger's hands, and he never forgot the weight of that gift. Now, 20 years later, in a narrow workshop tucked behind a row of zinc-roofed houses in Owerri, he was doing the same thing for someone else's child. And his wife was standing in the doorway with her arms folded, watching him do it. "You gave away another pair," Patricia said. It was not a question. David did not look up from the boot he was stitching. The boy outside St. Peter's Primary, his feet were bleeding on the gravel. And our own son's feet, David, what of them? Emeka needs new sandals for school, and you are out there playing father to every child in this town. The leather in David's hand trembled slightly, though his voice did not. Somebody did this for me once. I was 7 years old, walking to mass on broken glass and pretending it did not hurt. A man I never knew gave me my first pair of shoes. I never even learned his name. That was a long time ago, Patricia said, her voice tightening with the particular exhaustion of a woman counting naira she did not have. We are not that man. We do not have money to throw at every barefoot child in Owerri. I am not throwing money, David said quietly. I am repaying a debt. She left the doorway without another word, and David sat alone with the smell of leather and glue, listening to his own heartbeat keep time with the hammer. David's shop was small, no bigger than 2 rooms pushed together, with a tin roof that groaned every time the rain came hard. He had inherited the trade from his uncle, a quiet man who never explained why he insisted David learn shoemaking instead of something more profitable like trading or driving. His uncle used to say, "Shoes carry people. Feed a man and he eats for a day. Give him shoes and he can walk somewhere new." For 3 years now, David had kept a private ritual. Every week, no matter how thin the money was, he made 1 pair of shoes that he did not sell. He gave them away, to the boy who walked barefoot to the market every morning, to the girl whose slippers had split clean through the sole, to whichever child crossed his path looking most like the boy he once was. He never told anyone where the shoes came from. He simply left them where they would be found or pressed them into small hands and walked away before thanks could catch up with him. Patricia had married a hopeful young craftsman with dreams of opening a real shoe store on the main road. She had not married a man who quietly bled the family's already thin resources into the feet of strangers. The resentment had grown slowly, the way damp grows into a wall, until it had become something she could not unsee every time David came home with sawdust on his hands and an empty space where money should have been. Their son, Emeka, was 8 years old and did not yet understand why his mother's voice rose every Friday evening when his father returned from the shop. All he knew was that his own shoes had a small tear near the toe, and that his father, who made shoes for a living, had not yet fixed them. One evening, after another argument that ended with Patricia retreating to the back room in silence, David sat outside under the low moon and thought about the stranger from his childhood. He remembered the hands more than his face, rough, sure hands that had knelt down in the dust outside the church and fitted a small leather shoe onto David's bare foot without a word of explanation, without asking for anything in return. David had spent his whole life trying to become a man worthy of that memory, and he was beginning to wonder if becoming that man meant losing the woman he loved.
The escalation came on a Wednesday, when Patricia discovered that David had quietly sold his late father's old radio, the one relic of his childhood home, to buy leather for 3 pairs of children's shoes. She found the radio gone from its shelf and the workshop full of fresh hide, and something in her finally cracked. "You sold your father's radio, the only thing you had left of him, for shoes for children who are not even yours?" "They are somebody's children," David said. just like I was somebody's child once. And what of your own child, David? What of Emeka? What of me? Patricia's eyes were wet now, but her jaw was set hard. I am tired of being married to a memory. I am tired of competing with a stranger who gave you shoes 30 years ago and never even stayed to see what you became. David had no answer that would satisfy her, because the truth was larger than an answer. He simply said, I cannot stop. Not because I do not love you and Emeka, but because if I stop, I think I will lose the only part of myself that ever made sense. Patricia did not respond. She packed a small bag that night and took Emeka to her sister's house in Aba, telling David she needed air, needed distance, needed to think about whether she could keep living a life stitched together out of other people's gratitude while her own family went without. The workshop felt unbearably quiet without them. David kept working, kept stitching, kept giving away his one pair a week, though now each pair felt heavier in his hands, weighted with the question of whether his devotion to strangers was costing him everything that mattered most. Word of David's quiet shoe giving had begun to spread through the neighborhood in the way good things sometimes do, slowly, then all at once. Mothers whispered about the shoemaker who left gifts at doorsteps. Children who had once walked barefoot now ran through the dust in proper shoes, telling their friends about the man at the corner shop who never wanted thanks. A local school teacher noticed an unusual rise in attendance among the poorest children, all of them suddenly equipped with steady little shoes that fit. It was on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks into Patricia's absence, that an old man appeared at David's shop door. He was thin, his clothes worn through at the elbows, his back bent forward as though carrying decades of weight he could no longer set down. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. They told me in town there is a shoemaker here who gives shoes to children who cannot afford them, the old man said. His voice was hoarse, uncertain. I am sorry to ask. I have nowhere else to go. David looked up from his workbench, and something in the old man's eyes struck him as familiar, though he could not place why. Sit down, David said. Tell me what you need. The old man lowered himself slowly onto the bench across from David's work table. I do not need shoes, he said. I need work or food or a place to rest my head for a few nights. I have walked from Oweri's edge with nothing but this small sack. He gestured to a small threadbare sack at his feet. I was a builder once. I had money. I helped people when I had it. Now I have nothing. And nobody remembers a man who only gave and never asked for anything back. David felt something tighten in his chest. What is your name, sir? Augustine, the old man said. Augustine Nweke. David sat very still. The name meant nothing to him directly, but something about the man's hands, rough, sure hands, even now trembling with age, pulled at a memory buried 30 years deep. Did you ever live near St. Peter's Church many years ago? Augustine's eyes lifted, surprised by the question. I did. I used to walk that road every Sunday. I kept a small bag of shoes in those days. Old ones, donated ones, sometimes new ones I bought myself. I would give them to the children who walked to mass with bare feet. It was a small thing. I do not know why I am telling you this. David's hands had gone still on the leather in front of him. You gave a boy his first pair of shoes outside that church. Black ones, a little too big, but he did not care. He never forgot you. Augustine frowned, trying to summon a memory worn thin with decades of hardship. I gave shoes to many boys. This one became a shoemaker because of you. David's voice was unsteady now. The old man stared at David for a long moment, and something in his weathered face shifted. Disbelief, then dawning recognition, then a grief so old it seemed to have been waiting 30 years for permission to surface. I lost everything, Augustine said quietly. My business failed. My wife passed. My children moved away and stopped writing. I gave so much when I had it, and when I needed help myself, there was no one left who remembered. David rose from his workbench and knelt in front of the old man, the same way Augustine had knelt in front of him. "I remember," David said. "I have spent every week of the last 3 years trying to become the man who knelt down in that dust for me. You did not just give me shoes, Augustine. You gave me a reason to become someone." The two men sat together in the small shop as the afternoon light slanted through the doorway, and for the first time in weeks, the silence in David's workshop did not feel like loneliness. It felt like the closing of a long, slow circle. David did not hesitate. He gave Augustine a room in the back of the shop, the same storage space where he kept his leather and tools, and he gave him food from what little remained in the kitchen, and he gave him work, small tasks at first, cutting leather, polishing finished shoes, tasks that let the old man feel useful again, rather than merely rescued. It was a school teacher who first told Patricia what was happening, running into her at the Aba market and mentioning in the easy way news travels among women the old man who had shown up at David's shop and the strange, beautiful coincidence binding the two men together. Patricia returned to Owerri 3 days later, Emeka's hand in hers, uncertain of what she would find. She walked into the shop and saw David seated beside a frail old man, both of them bent over a single shoe, stitching together in companionable silence. Augustine looked up first and saw a young woman standing in the doorway with a watchful boy at her side, and he understood immediately who she must be. "You must be Patricia," Augustine said, rising slowly, leaning on the workbench for support. "Your husband has told me everything. He has been carrying a debt for 30 years that was never truly his to carry alone. And I am ashamed it took me becoming a beggar at his door to repay even a fraction of what he believes he owes me." Patricia's eyes moved from the old man to her husband, taking in the small, careful arrangement of a life rebuilt around an unexpected guest. The borrowed mattress in the corner, the second chair pulled up to the workbench, the quiet dignity with which David had clearly been treating a stranger who had once, decades ago, treated him the same way. "I did not understand," Patricia said softly, more to herself than to either of them. "I thought you were giving away pieces of our family to strangers who would never give anything back. I did not know you were paying forward something that was given to you when you had nothing."
David stood and crossed the small room to where she stood. "I should have explained it better. I should have made you part of it instead of carrying it alone." "You should have," Patricia agreed, though her voice had softened entirely. "But I am here now, and I want to understand." Over the following weeks, the shop transformed. Patricia, once resentful of every shoe given away for free, began organizing donations, old shoes for repair, leather scraps, small contributions of money that added up where David's alone never could. Augustine, regaining strength with each passing week, became the shop's quiet anchor, teaching Emeka how to cut leather, telling him stories of the old days when he too had given without expecting a return. The shop that had once strained under the weight of David's solitary devotion now thrived under shared purpose. Word spread further than before, not just of a shoemaker who gave away shoes, but of a family who had taken in a stranger and turned an old debt into a living, breathing community. Local market women began sending their own children's worn-out shoes for repair at discounted rates, knowing a portion of every transaction quietly funded the next pair given to a barefoot child. A small wooden sign appeared above the shop door, hand-painted by Emeka under Augustine's patient instruction: "Shoes for every foot, paid and unpaid." Augustine never fully recovered the years he had lost, but he lived his final months not as a forgotten man begging at strangers' doors, but as a grandfather figure to a boy who called him Papa Augustine. Proof that what a man gives away never truly disappears. It simply waits, sometimes 30 years, to find its way home. On the evening Augustine passed, quietly, in his sleep, in the small back room of the shop he had helped rebuild, David sat beside the old man's body until morning, holding the same rough, weathered hand that once knelt down in the dust outside St. Peter's Church and changed the direction of a frightened 7-year-old's entire life. Patricia sat beside her husband through the night, her hand on his shoulder, no longer questioning the debt he had spent his life repaying, but honoring it alongside him. They buried Augustine with the dignity of a man who deserved far more recognition than the world had given him while he lived. The whole street came. Children he had never met stood at the edges of the small gathering, wearing shoes David had given them, as though even in death, Augustine's quiet generosity had multiplied beyond anything he could have imagined when he first knelt down with a single pair of shoes 30 years before. David never stopped his weekly ritual. With Patricia now beside him, and Emeka old enough to cut leather under his father's instruction, the shop became something neither David nor Augustine could have built alone. A small, ordinary place that had quietly decided no child in their corner of Owerri would walk barefoot if they could help it. Years later, when people asked David why he still gave away a pair of shoes every single week, even after the shop had grown large enough to franchise, even after Patricia had become its most fearsome and capable manager, even after Emeka had taken over the books, David would only smile and say what Augustine had told him in his final weeks. A debt like that is never truly repaid. You only ever pass it forward and trust that it lands where it is needed. And somewhere in Owerri, on any given Sunday morning, a child who had once walked to church on bare and bleeding feet now walked in shoes that fit, not knowing the name of the man who had given them, only knowing that someone, somewhere, had decided their feet deserved better than the ground alone could offer. Dividing debate question. You have done what David did, given away your family's last resources to a stranger's child, trusting the debt would one day come back around? If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs it today and drop a comment. We want to hear from you. God bless you.